Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin, and I am Dr. Brovkin. Today, my dear subscribers, I'd like to continue the topic on the Ukraine war, but most specifically, I do it, as you know, when there is new information, new developments, and something else to explain. So my today's presentation is called Putin, Trump, the Contours of a Deal, and its opponents. So we will go over the major players and actors in this unfolding drama, but there is new information and new ideas about how to interpret what is going on, and the starting point of that is the contours of a deal. The contours means that there is no specifically clear-cut deal yet, but there are negotiations, and the most recent development is the so-called Trump's ultimatum. Now, it's not exactly an ultimatum. This is like the journalist's rendition of it, but to make it more clear, it is a deadline that President Trump set for the end of the hostilities, which is June 2026. Now, he basically said to both parties, and it appeared like he's threatening sanctions on Russia and more action against Russian oil companies and Russian fleet and so on, and at the same time to the Ukrainian leadership that they have to agree on a deal, or else presumably American aid of any kind would stop. Now, I'll go over the Russian reaction, but first let me begin with Zelensky's reaction and options that he has. Now, so far, up to now, President Zelensky has completely ruled out any concessions on territory. And beyond that, the negotiations basically are stalled, and most of the observers actually said this is it. There's not going to be any more negotiations because unless Ukrainians agree to territorial concession, anything else is impossible to proceed. Now, Zelensky's plan, it seems to me, is to pretend to negotiate, to continue to talk, and at the same time to drag it out as long as possible. His hope is to survive until November. And there is a slimmer of a hope that the Democrats would win the majority in the midterm elections, and then Zelensky would feel that he has survived, because the Democratic control of the Congress may mean more funding, may mean that Trump would be busy defending himself against a new impeachment or whatever else the Democrats are going to come up with, and that would be new hope for Zelensky to survive a few months more if the Russians by that time will not finish the war by military means. In any case, Zelensky's program or hope and action is to procrastinate and survive as long as possible. However, it's not so easy because Zelensky has opponents, and his opponents, as we have discussed in many preceding videos, are out to get him. And his opponents are of two kinds. One of are the nationalists of various stripes who basically refuse to cede any territory, but who want to replace him. And among those is Poroshenko and General Zaluzhny in London with his British connections, and Klitschko, and they are calling for creation of a government of national unity in order to confront the Russians and conduct the war better, and to rely on the British and the Europeans and continue the fight and stop any negotiations. However, there are others, and among those there are not allowed to speak because they would be arrested and thrown into jail as soon as they open their mouth in that direction. But, for example, Mr. Arestovich has been saying that he is ready to accept Russian terms, and and that's good enough, because that would mean bloodshed ends. 2/3 of Ukraine are still in the condition to revive, to rebuild, to join European Union, and this is worth a lot to just lose territory and keep everything else. So there are two types of opposition. Now, the intricacies of the specific Ukrainian political situation is that, as you may or may not know, Zelensky's term as president ended in May 2024. So in May, it'll be 2 years that he's, strictly speaking, governing without any legitimate rights to do so. And the Russians have always been saying that they are ready to negotiate, but they cannot sign anything with Zelensky because it has no validity. And I think that they have convinced President Trump that that is the case. So what could be done about it? Well, in ideal circumstances is new elections. But the Russians are reluctant to promote new elections because in the conditions of total control over the media and the banning of all opposition parties and a state of emergency, the elections will not generate anything other than either Zelensky himself or one of his surrogates, such as Poroshenko or Zaluzhny, and that wouldn't serve any purpose for ending the war. So another version of events, and I think that's the one that Putin favors and may have, I don't know, I'm not into it, but may have conveyed to Trump and may indeed have convinced Trump that that's the way to go. And that means that the official spokesman of Ukraine, by Ukrainian constitution, who has a right to sign in the absence of the president whose term is expired, is the Speaker of the House. But the current Speaker of the House is completely Zelensky's man, and he is not going to do anything he's not permitted. However, the leader of the ruling party, the Servants of the People, it's called in English, which is Zelensky's party, is Mr. Arahamia. And Mr. Arahamia is the one who signed for Ukraine the agreement with Russia in March 2022 when they agreed to Russian terms. And Arahamia is the leader of that faction. So it seems to me that many people have been trying to convince Arahamia to act. And it's quite simple. If the majority in the Rada voted to the effect that Zelensky's term is over and the Speaker of the Rada signs on behalf of Ukraine, that's all that's needed. Just one vote in the parliament, in the Rada. So it seems to me that that may be what Putin and Trump have agreed upon, is that the way to get rid of Zelensky is to follow by the letter the Ukrainian constitution, to remove Zelensky, either have new agreement or sign an accord by the leader of the parliament, the Rada. Now, suppose this is signed. What happens next, and what's in it for Trump? Well, it seems to me that there's two things that in it there for Trump. Number one is that he can present himself that he ended the most difficult conflict still around, and take all the laurels of a peacemaker. But behind the scenes, what's also out there, and this has become known just a few days ago, is the so-called Dmitriev Fund. Now, when I try to look into what it is, it seems to me that this is some kind of a Russian-American agreement of a joint business fund. Some of the money might be used to restoration of Ukraine and the rebuilding of the Ukraine, perhaps a big enough sum to make it attractive to the Ukrainian side, especially those who would sign a peace accord. Now, the sums are extraordinary. There's a figure mentioned of 12 trillion US dollars. Now, apparently, the way I look at it, this is a incitement, or excuse me, a kind of a gift to Trump, inducement to Trump from President Putin to make him interested in the joint cooperation, economic cooperation. It could perhaps involve joint exploration of the oil in the Arctic, or in the Sakhalin in the Far East, or Russian rare earth metals, perhaps even joint development of Ukrainian rare earth or whatever. But it seems to me that the figure is mentioned of 12 trillion, enormous sum of money. And it seems to me also that this is Putin's way of getting Trump to lift Russian sanctions, which is one of the major goals of the war, and start this cooperation, which is good enough compensation for not achieving all of Russian objectives on the battlefield. However, and that comes to be most interesting. However, Putin's dilemma, as I have mentioned before in a couple of previous videos, is that Putin has a problem. He has to please Trump, and at the same time, he has to deal with opposition to him in Russia. And the opposition is not obvious, not open. It's really taking the form of a critique. And the critique is more and more openly pronounced by the generals, the ones I often cite, to the effect that just 4 provinces is not good enough. They would like the offensive to continue, to include the liberation, as they put it, of the entire Novorossiya, which means inclusion of Kharkov, Nikolaev, and Odessa into the Russian Federation, which means more than just 4 provinces which Putin has requested. And of course, all the rest of it: restoration of Russian language rights, restoration of Russian church, banning of any NATO foreign troops, etc., etc. So let me give you a direct quote in one of the recent talk shows that General Sivkov, a very influential general in the missile forces and a specialist in Russian military affairs, he said, and I quote, "There are different paths to peace, but the shortest is the complete destruction of the enemy." Another general who you see on your screens now said, and this is the quote that you see, "What we need to achieve is liberation of the Russian-speaking population from the colonial oppression which is imposed on them by the Banderovite regime backed by the Western powers." So in other words, they are no longer hiding their goals, that the end goal of the war aim, is liberation of Novorossiya, which and then the rest of it too, and the regime change. They do not want any deals signed with Zelensky or any other type of Banderovite, what they call neo-Nazi regime, which is essentially a pro-Western regime. And the way to do it is by regime change. So what scenarios could there be considered of regime change? And now we're completely in the speculative realm. But what is clear beyond any reasonable doubt is that Zelensky and all the nationalist forces in Ukraine will refuse to sign any deal that accepts the territorial concession to Russia, and especially banning of neo-Nazi detachments and putting limits on the Ukrainian army and so on. So that means that there are others who are ready, and they will be there may be a fight between the two, or at least a disagreement. And it may also be that in the case of a signing of a deal by whoever it is, a constitutionally approved chairman of the parliament or a newly elected president or whoever, even if Zelensky signs it, he will be in big trouble with the nationalists who have held power in Ukraine since 2014. And there may be some territories, just like it happened in 2014, such as Odessa or Kharkov, who would say, no, we don't agree with that. We would like peace, and declare that they are in disaccord with the government in Kiev. And in the conditions of Russian unfolding offensive, this may create a situation that there is no government recognized by all in Ukraine, and that may lead to unexpected results, most likely in Russia's favor. Now, if that happens, then of course Putin may have the cake and eat it too. He may present it as a victory to his Russian generals' opponents who want more, and at the same time have an accord acceptable to compromise figures like Arestovich or somebody like him, and at the same time to please President Trump. So we're now witnessing the unfolding of a very, very interesting diplomatic and military game, or continuation of the drama, which may end in a few months. And that's it for today, my dear friends. I want to remind you to look at my other playlists, to look at my personal narrative playlist about my life, and of course to read my books, the latest of which is From Vladimir Lenin to Vladimir Putin. Thank you. Goodbye.